That evening, the Jefferson Hotel in Washington, D.C., shone brightly like a precious gem in the heart of the capital. The Freedom Summit Gala unfolded under the radiant glow of crystal chandeliers, with glittering formal attire and the echoes of laughter from the most powerful figures in politics and media. This wasn't just an event to celebrate the values of freedom. It was an occasion for influential individuals to showcase their power before the public. Yet, beneath the congratulatory words and the artificial smiles of the crowd, a dark scheme had been meticulously planned. Samuel Kane, a renowned journalist from the Liberal Voice, entered the gala with the confidence of someone who believed himself to be the center of attention. His tailored black suit, a fiery red tie, and a perpetual smirk made him stand out among the crowd. But Kane wasn't there to sip wine or contribute to charity. For him, this gala wasn't just an event, it was a battlefield. "Trump," Kane muttered under his breath, his sharp gaze scanning the room. "Today will be the day you lose everything." Kane had prepared every detail of his plan to take down former President Donald Trump, a man he viewed as the embodiment of authoritarianism and a threat to freedom. He wasn't seeking truth or dialogue. His goal was to create a media storm, a decisive blow to the reputation of the Trump family. 3 hidden cameras had been carefully installed around the banquet hall. Kane's media team was on standby, ready to edit and live stream the golden moments he hoped would show Donald Trump flustered or, better yet, enraged. A list of provocative questions, polished over several days, was designed solely to back Trump into a corner where any answer would harm him. In Kane's mind, the victory was already his. He imagined himself splashed across front pages, hailed as the journalist who exposed the truth. But what Kane hadn't anticipated was that Donald Trump wasn't the only one walking into the gala that evening. Accompanying him was someone Kane underestimated, someone he didn't consider a threat: Barron Trump. Donald Trump entered the grand ballroom with his characteristic presence, confident, commanding, and exuding an aura of power that naturally drew every eye in the room. The guests, a mix of political elites, media figures, and influential donors, instinctively turned toward the former president as he strode across the floor with his unmistakable air of authority. But tonight, the spotlight didn't linger solely on Donald Trump. Beside him walked his son, Barron Trump, towering over most of the attendees. Barron's stature alone made him impossible to ignore. Yet it wasn't just his height that captured the room's attention. It was his demeanor. His calm, composed expression spoke volumes, conveying a quiet confidence that suggested he was far more than a teenager tagging along to a formal event. Barron's every step was deliberate, his presence radiating a sense of readiness. This wasn't a young man caught in the shadow of his father. This was someone prepared for the challenges of the evening, someone who knew the weight of the name he carried and was ready to uphold it. From across the room, Samuel Kane observed the pair with a smirk. The seasoned journalist from the Liberal Voice had spent weeks meticulously preparing for this night. Kane had no intention of simply covering the gala. He had come armed with a plan to confront Donald Trump, to expose what he believed to be the former president's hypocrisy and failures in front of a live audience. His gaze lingered on Barron. Just a kid, he thought dismissively, sipping his drink with a mix of amusement and disdain. He's tall, sure, but he's young. This will be easy. The gala unfolded with its usual grandeur. The hum of polite conversation filled the room, punctuated by the occasional clink of glasses. Guests mingled, exchanging pleasantries and networking under the sparkling chandeliers that bathed the ballroom in a golden glow. Yet Kane remained focused, his eyes darting toward Donald Trump every few minutes as he waited for the perfect moment to strike. Finally, Kane decided it was time. Seizing a microphone, he strode toward the stage with the confidence of a man who believed he was in complete control of the situation. His movements were deliberate, his posture radiating authority as he took his place in front of the room. The buzz of conversation quieted as the crowd turned to face him. Kane adjusted the microphone and glanced around, letting the silence build for effect before locking his sharp gaze on Donald Trump. "Mr. Trump," Kane began, his voice steady and resonant, carrying through the hall with ease. He paused, letting the room hang on his words as if setting the stage for a dramatic reveal. "You often claim to be a man of the people, yet your policies, ranging from tax cuts to trade negotiations, seem to serve only the wealthy. How do you justify this contradiction?" The room grew silent, the weight of the question hanging in the air. All eyes turned to Donald Trump, waiting to see how the former president would respond. Kane's smirk widened ever so slightly. He was certain he had set a trap. In his mind, Trump had only two options: defend policies that Kane would easily pick apart or evade the question entirely, which would give Kane the moral high ground. But before Donald Trump could utter a word, another voice broke through the silence. "Excuse me, Mr. Kane," came the calm, steady voice of Barron Trump. A ripple of surprise swept through the crowd as Barron stepped forward, positioning himself beside his father. His towering presence and composed expression immediately drew the attention of everyone in the room. If Kane had hoped to intimidate the younger Trump with the weight of the moment, he was sorely mistaken. Barron's gaze was fixed firmly on Kane, his sharp blue eyes unwavering as he continued, his tone polite but firm. "May I address your question?" The room was electric. Whispers broke out among the attendees, many of whom were caught off guard by Barron's sudden intervention. Kane hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance. He hadn't prepared for this, but he quickly recovered, forcing a condescending smile as he replied, "Of course, young man. Let's hear what you have to say." Barron took another step forward, his presence commanding even more of the room. His voice, though measured, carried an undeniable strength that demanded attention. "Mr. Kane," Barron began, his voice steady and resonant, cutting through the thick silence of the room. The crowd's attention shifted entirely to him, their whispers fading as they waited for what he would say next. "I have a question for you. What gives you the right to define patriotism or service to the community?" Kane, momentarily caught off guard, raised an eyebrow. The young man's confidence was unexpected, and it rattled him more than he cared to admit. Recovering quickly, he forced a sneer onto his face. "And what do you think you know about politics?" "Kid," he replied, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're young. Surely, you can't believe you have the experience to challenge me." But Barron didn't flinch. Instead, he stood tall, his sharp gaze locking firmly onto Kane. "I don't need to be a politician to recognize dishonesty," he replied, his words deliberate and cutting. "You claim my father only helps the wealthy. Have you ever mentioned his signing of criminal justice reform? Or the initiatives he supported to uplift the African American community and working class Americans? Or is that inconvenient for the narrative you're trying to sell?" The weight of Barron's words hung in the air. A few murmurs rippled through the room as attendees glanced at each other, their expressions shifting from curiosity to admiration. Kane, sensing the tide turning, quickly jumped in to regain control. "But his policies," Kane started, his voice raised slightly, trying to cut off the growing momentum. "Which policies, Mr. Kane?" Barron interrupted, his tone firm and unyielding. "The policies that created millions of jobs? The trade deals that leveled the playing field for American manufacturers? Or perhaps the tax cuts that allowed small businesses to grow and thrive? Tell me, which of those policies is the one you're so determined to criticize?" Kane opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The room grew quieter, the tension almost tangible. You're not critiquing policies. Barron continued, his voice growing sharper. You're distorting the truth to fit your narrative. That's not journalism. It's manipulation. The murmur in the room grew louder now, the audience exchanging glances as Kane shifted uncomfortably on his feet. The journalist, who had entered the gala brimming with confidence, now seemed to falter under the weight of Barron's piercing questions. Deciding to pivot, Kane forced a condescending smile and tried to redirect the conversation. You're quite eloquent, Barron, he said, his words laced with sarcasm. But your family isn't exactly a model of perfection. Your father has been criticized by hundreds of newspapers. Surely not all of them are wrong. Barron arched an eyebrow at Kane's attempt to turn the tables, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. The room seemed to hold its breath, waiting for his response. That's true, Mr. Kane, Barron replied, his voice calm but carrying an edge that sent a chill through the air. But let me ask you this, how many of those articles you've written were grounded in fact? Or were they simply crafted to grab attention and boost your views? How many of them served the public good? And how many served your career? Kane's face flushed a deep shade of red. He opened his mouth to counter, but found himself struggling to find the right words. Finally, he blurted out, I'm a journalist. My job is to hold people like your family accountable. Barron's smirk deepened, and his tone turned colder, cutting through the room like a blade. Is that so? He asked, his words deliberate, each one landing like a blow. Then let's talk about accountability, Mr. Kane. He took a step forward, the glow of the chandelier casting a shadow behind him that seemed to grow with each movement. The room was utterly silent, every eye fixed on the young man who now commanded their full attention. How about the article you wrote last month accusing my father without a shred of evidence? Barron continued, his voice unwavering. Or the tweet you posted last year where you called Christians fanatics? Mr. Kane, I have those right here on my phone. Would you like me to project them onto the big screen so everyone here can see exactly what you've said? Gasps rippled through the audience. A few attendees exchanged shocked glances, while others murmured among themselves. Kane froze, his confident facade cracking under the weight of Barron's words. Sweat began to bead on his forehead as he instinctively took a step back, his hands clutching the microphone like it was his only lifeline. Barron stood firm, his voice steady but sharp. You speak of accountability, but you don't practice it. You speak of truth, but you manipulate it. The public deserves better than this. They deserve real journalism, not manufactured outrage and personal vendettas disguised as reporting. The room erupted in whispers, the crowd clearly swayed by Barron's composure and the power of his words. Kane, for all his preparation and bravado, suddenly seemed very small in comparison to the young man who had just dismantled him with nothing more than truth and unwavering resolve. Samuel Kane, visibly faltering under the weight of the confrontation, tried to rally himself, forcing a strained smile. His voice, no longer carrying the same confident authority, trembled slightly as he spoke. I'm just doing my job, he said, his tone defensive, almost pleading. I represent the public, and the public has a right to know the truth about your family. Barron Trump didn't flinch. His posture was unwavering, his expression calm yet commanding. He let the silence hang for a moment, the weight of Kane's words dissipating into the air. Then, with a deliberate step forward, Barron positioned himself directly in the center of the room, his towering frame making it impossible for anyone to ignore him. The public has a right to know the truth. Mr. Kane? Barron began, his voice steady but with an undercurrent of power that resonated through the room. His gaze locked onto Kane, sharp and unrelenting, cutting through the growing tension like a blade. Then let me show them the truth about you. The room, already on edge, fell into complete silence, All eyes were glued to Barron as he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. The soft glow of the screen illuminated his face, highlighting his expression of quiet determination. The anticipation was palpable as Barron raised the phone slightly, his movements deliberate, calculated. His gaze didn't waver from Kane, whose confidence was now visibly crumbling under the intense scrutiny. "This was your plan, wasn't it?" Barron said, his tone still calm, but now laced with an unmistakable edge of thunderous authority. The words echoed through the room, bouncing off the high ceilings and falling heavy on the ears of everyone present. Slowly, Barron turned the screen toward the audience. The glow of the phone illuminated the faces of those nearest to him, their expressions shifting from curiosity to shock as they read the text on display. On the phone screen was a screenshot of an email. The bold, unmistakable headline stood out like a beacon of condemnation. "Need outrage content by 5 p.m. Target, Trump family. Ensure maximum engagement." A wave of murmurs swept through the room, growing louder with every passing second. Attendees exchanged bewildered glances, their disbelief evident as the weight of what they were seeing began to sink in. Gasps punctuated the growing commotion, some audible enough to pierce the stunned silence that had gripped much of the crowd. Samuel Kane stood frozen, his earlier bravado now entirely erased. His face, once flush with confidence, had turned a ghostly shade of pale as he stared at the damning evidence displayed before him. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out, only the faint tremble of someone who knew they had been caught. Barron let the moment linger, allowing the murmurs of the crowd to build into a crescendo of disbelief and outrage. He slowly lowered the phone but maintained his gaze on Kane, his expression one of controlled intensity. "This email," Barron began again, his voice cutting through the noise with the precision of a scalpel, "isn't the work of a journalist seeking the truth. It's the work of someone manufacturing outrage, spreading falsehoods, and manipulating the public for clicks and profit." The audience, many of whom had initially arrived with mixed feelings about the Trump family, now looked at Kane with varying degrees of skepticism and anger. Whispers rippled through the room, questions, accusations, and judgment swirling in the charged atmosphere. Barron took another step forward, his towering presence now looming over Kane, who seemed to shrink under the pressure. "Is this what you call journalism, Mr. Kane?" Barron asked, his voice still calm but carrying a weight that made the question feel rhetorical. "Because it looks more like deception. It looks like exploitation." Kane's hands trembled slightly as he clutched the microphone, searching for words that refused to come. His carefully constructed facade of professionalism had been shattered, and the room knew it. Barron's eyes didn't leave Kane as he continued. "The public doesn't need fabricated outrage or manipulated narratives to understand the world around them. What they need is the truth. And tonight, Mr. Kane, they're getting the truth, not just about my family, but about you." The room was electric, the air thick with the weight of what had just transpired. Barron had not only dismantled Kane's argument, but also exposed the journalist's duplicity for all to see. And in doing so, he left no doubt about who truly held the moral high ground in this confrontation. Barron didn't pause. His composure was unshaken, his words deliberate and powerful, slicing through the tension in the room like a blade. With every sentence he delivered, the silence grew heavier, and the crowd leaned in, captivated. "This is the truth about your work, Mr. Kane," Barron said, his voice steady, yet carrying a quiet force that demanded attention. His gaze swept across the room before returning to Kane, pinning him in place. "This isn't journalism. It's not the truth. What we're looking at here is a carefully orchestrated campaign. A campaign designed not to inform, but to destroy. It's built to incite outrage, to manipulate emotions, and to drive clicks. And at the center of it all, your personal agenda and financial gain. He let his words hang in the air for a moment, allowing them to sink in. The room was utterly still. Every pair of eyes now locked on the young man who had seized control of the narrative with the precision and poise of someone far beyond his years. Without breaking eye contact with Kane, Barron lifted his phone again. The soft glow of the screen cast a faint light across his face as he swiped to another set of emails. Slowly, deliberately, he turned the screen toward the audience. "These," he began, his voice calm but sharper now, "are more of your truths, Mr. Kane. Emails detailing how you and your team deliberately chose to distort facts, selecting provocative images and crafting headlines specifically designed to stoke public anger. You weren't informing the public, you were feeding them outrage, manufactured outrage." The audience gasped softly, the weight of Barron's accusations coupled with the evidence on his screen sending ripples of shock through the room. People craned their necks to see the damning messages, murmurs breaking out among small clusters of attendees. Barron swiped again, displaying another email. "Right here. You're instructing your team to edit photos to make my family appear out of touch. In this one," he gestured to another message, "you're advising them to misquote my father, intentionally twisting his words to make him look like a villain. Is that what you call journalism, Mr. Kane? Because from where I'm standing, it looks more like propaganda." Kane's face turned a deeper shade of red, his confident smirk long gone. He opened his mouth as if to respond but quickly closed it, unable to muster a defense that would hold up under the weight of Barron's evidence. Barron took a step closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over Kane. His tone remained measured, but there was a fire in his words, a passion that burned brightly beneath his calm exterior. "Mr. Kane," he continued, his voice now carrying an unmistakable edge, "the public doesn't need your hateful and deceitful articles to understand my family. They don't need your manipulation to see the truth. What they need is honesty. They need facts. They need integrity. And they need journalists who uphold those principles, not exploit them." The room seemed to collectively hold its breath, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Barron let his gaze sweep across the audience, his words now aimed not just at Kane, but at everyone present. "And the truth, Mr. Kane," Barron said, his voice rising slightly for emphasis, "is that you've betrayed their trust. You're not protecting the public, you're exploiting them. You're using their emotions, their frustrations, their fears, to serve your own selfish agenda." A murmur rippled through the crowd, louder this time. Attendees exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement while others whispered in astonishment. Kane, for all his experience, looked utterly cornered. His hands fidgeted nervously, his gaze darting between Barron and the crowd as if searching for an escape route that didn't exist. Barron didn't relent. His voice softened slightly, but his words lost none of their power. "If you want to talk about accountability, Mr. Kane, let's start with you. Let's start with the damage you've done, the trust you've broken, and the truth you've twisted. Because tonight, that stops here." The crowd erupted into whispers and gasps, the weight of Barron's accusations and the evidence he presented reverberating through the grand hall. Kane stood frozen, unable to respond, his carefully constructed image of authority now shattered by a young man who had turned the tables with nothing but facts and composure. Barron had not only taken control of the conversation, he had dismantled Kane's credibility piece by piece, leaving no doubt about who held the moral high ground. Kane, visibly shaken, tried desperately to salvage the situation. He adjusted his tie, forcing a faint smile that barely masked his unease. "This," he began, his voice faltering slightly before he regained some composure. "This is an internal email. You don't understand the context. Our job is to expose issues with those in power." Before he could finish, Barron Trump stepped forward, cutting him off with a sharpness that made the room collectively hold its breath. His gaze was razor-sharp, his tone unwavering. "Context?" Barron repeated, his voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced any remaining whispers in the room. "What context justifies fabricating articles, attacking my family with false claims, and twisting my father's words to fit your narrative? What context allows you to send paparazzi to stalk my family, to take invasive photos of my sister, and to publish her home address on social media, putting her safety at risk?" The words hit Kane like a series of blows, each one striking deeper than the last. The crowd was frozen, their eyes darting between the young Trump and the increasingly flustered journalist. Kane's faint smile faded entirely, replaced by a look of growing discomfort as Barron's piercing words dismantled his credibility. Barron took another step forward, his presence commanding the room. "What context?" he continued, his voice now rising slightly but remaining composed. "Permits emails like this? Emails that blatantly call for manufactured outrage, designed not to inform, but to manipulate. Emails that prioritize grabbing attention and raking in ad revenue over delivering the truth. Is this what you call journalism, Mr. Kane? Is this the justice you claim to uphold?" The silence in the room was deafening. Barron's voice, calm yet charged with conviction, echoed off the walls of the grand ballroom. His words didn't just question Kane's actions, they laid them bare for everyone to see. Kane shifted uncomfortably on his feet, the weight of the moment pressing down on him like a spotlight he couldn't escape. His hands fidgeted nervously, his face glistening with beads of sweat under the intense scrutiny of the audience. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out, just the faint gasp of someone searching for an escape that didn't exist. Barron's gaze didn't waver. His eyes bore into Kane's, unflinching, as though daring him to try and defend the indefensible. The young man's voice softened slightly, but the steel in his tone remained. "Is this what you want the public to believe journalism is?" Barron asked, his words slow and deliberate, each one landing like a hammer. "A tool for lies and manipulation, a way to exploit their trust while pretending to serve them? Because from where I stand, Mr. Kane, it looks like you've betrayed that trust. It looks like you've turned your back on the very principles you claim to uphold." The weight of Barron's words settled over the room like a storm cloud, heavy and inescapable. The audience was riveted, their expressions a mix of shock and growing disdain for Kane. The journalist, for all his years of experience and preparation, looked utterly lost. His eyes darted around the room, avoiding Barron's, as though searching for someone, anyone, who might come to his defense. But there was no one. Barron stepped even closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over Kane. "You claim your job is to expose issues with those in power," he said, his voice dropping to a lower, more deliberate tone that seemed to slice through the air. "But tonight, Mr. Kane, the only thing being exposed is you." The tension in the room was palpable, the kind that made every second feel like an eternity. Kane, once so confident and composed, now stood frozen, unable to muster even a weak rebuttal. Barron had turned the tables, taking full control of the narrative with precision and poise. The audience, captivated by the confrontation, waited in silence, knowing they were witnessing a moment they wouldn't soon forget. Barron Trump stood tall, his presence commanding the attention of every soul in the room. He took a moment to survey the crowd, his sharp gaze meeting the eyes of attendees who, moments ago, had been murmuring amongst themselves but were now utterly captivated. His voice, calm yet resonant, broke the silence, no longer aimed solely at Samuel Kane but at everyone present. "We live in an era," Barron began, his tone deliberate, each word carrying the weight of his conviction. Where truth is distorted every single day, we are bombarded with stories that lack evidence, narratives that prey on our emotions and fuel outrage rather than reason. We are told to accept these fabrications without question, as if they are the only reality. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. The room was silent, the audience hanging on his every syllable. Barron's voice grew steadier, his words gaining momentum like a river carving through stone. "But God," he continued, his voice rising slightly with passion, "teaches us something very different. God teaches us that the truth will set us free. Not half-truths, not convenient truths, but the whole truth, the truth that stands firm in the face of scrutiny and is guided not by self-interest, but by integrity and accountability." A murmur rippled through the audience, faint but growing, as Barron's words resonated deeply with those who listened. Some nodded in agreement, while others leaned forward, eager to catch every word. "And tonight," Barron said, his voice rising further, filled with an unshakable determination, "I am here to reveal this truth, a truth that is often overshadowed by lies, twisted by agendas, and buried under sensationalism. Journalism, like any other power, must be held accountable to God and to the people." The room erupted into applause, a wave of sound that began at the edges of the crowd and quickly surged forward. People clapped vigorously, some rising from their chairs in an unspoken agreement with Barron's words. A few attendees even shouted, their voices rising above the applause. "Truth wins," one man yelled, his voice echoing through the grand hall. Another added, "Accountability matters." Barron stood firm, his expression composed but tinged with a quiet pride as he waited for the crowd to settle. He glanced toward his father, Donald Trump, who had stepped forward to join him. The elder Trump's hand rested firmly on Barron's shoulder, a gesture both protective and proud. His face broke into a warm, genuine smile, an expression of unspoken approval. Beside them, Melania Trump stood poised and elegant, her eyes fixed on her son with a look that radiated pride and satisfaction. She nodded softly, her expression conveying what words could not, that Barron had not only defended his family but had risen above the chaos to deliver a message that transcended politics. The Trump family hadn't just endured an attack. They had turned it into an opportunity, one that showcased their strength, resilience, and unwavering commitment to truth and integrity. Barron's words had resonated far beyond the walls of that room, echoing into the hearts of those who believed in the enduring power of honesty and faith. And in that moment, the young man standing at the center of it all had proven himself to be not just a defender of his family but a champion of the truth. The event quickly went viral on social media, garnering millions of views and thousands of comments praising Barron Trump's composure and intelligence. Hashtags like #TruthWins and #BarronTrump trended at the top on Twitter. Samuel Kane wasn't just humiliated. He also faced severe criticism from his own colleagues. Many news outlets began questioning his journalistic ethics, and some called for his resignation. But for those who follow the Trump family, this event was more than a personal victory. It was a profound lesson about the power of truth, integrity, and faith. Barron Trump proved that, regardless of age, courage and steadfastness can change the course of any situation. In a world full of chaos, Barron reminded everyone that truth remains the guiding light. And with faith in God, nothing is insurmountable.